lovelies, it's Miss Sadie Lace here on my Pinup Glamour channel and Pinup Glamour podcast. Today I have for you the topic of discussing what is pinup. I'm so excited to be extending my YouTube channel from here to also being on Spotify with my Pinup Glamour podcast. So if you're on there, it would be so fabulous if you could give me a follow and a 5-star review if you love it. Some episodes like today's video will also be shared to Spotify, but I will also have exclusive content on both platforms, so it's definitely worth following me on both of these. The topic of pinup I thought would be really fabulous to cover for those who are newer to pinup or those who may be scratching their heads who have just come across this video and thinking, what even is pinup? If you're not new to pinup though, I would love for you to take a moment to reflect on what pinup means to you. If you're on YouTube, please do let me know in the comments below what pinup means to you. When I tell people what I do for a living with burlesque, content creation, producing, and pinup, when it comes to pinup, I get a few different responses. Some people think vintage Hollywood starlets, some people think of pinup artwork, some people think of modern magazines like Penthouse, and others have no clue at all. When it comes to what actually pinup is, I wouldn't say any of these are incorrect. I think pinup is something we very much individually define for ourselves. For me, pinup is fashion, it's art, it's lifestyle, it's vocation, it's escapism, it's glamour, and it is happiness. The origins of the word pinup come simply from images of pinup girls that were quite literally pinned up onto the wall. The word in this meaning traces back to the 1930s from my research, and it could reference anything from actual pinup models to newspapers, advertisements, postcards, and other forms of print. Though different to what we envision today, pinups can also be seen historically as well, with origins in theatre, burlesque, advertising, publications, and other places too. While very different to what we envision today, one of the earlier pinup artists I would say is Charles Gibson, who created the Gibson Girl series in the 1890s, which was very much a personification of the feminine ideal. For most of us, when we hear the word pinup, we think of the 1950s, but I would say this kind of encapsulates from the 1920s up to the 1960s and can really go either side of this bracket in different community groups. Pinup during these times can be a reference to the fashion, the models, Hollywood starlets, publications, and other such things as this. Some vintage pinup models, so pinup models from the vintage eras that I really draw inspiration from include Betty Grable, Betty Page, Jayne Mansfield, Marilyn Monroe, Rita Hayworth, Marlene Dietrich, and Lucille Ball. Some of my favorite vintage pinup artists include Elvgren, Alberto Vargas, George Petty, Mozert, Rolf Armstrong, and Joyce Ballantyne. If you're on YouTube or see my post on Instagram, I would love to hear from you and hear who your vintage icons are. Outside our Hollywood starlets during these eras, a pinup model was not always a vocation that was praised. Even today, in 2023, when you are a femme-identifying human and you are capitalizing off your body, quite often there are a lot of judgments and comments made. Pinups were quite often burlesque dancers, sex workers, and other people trying to make money. I think it's very easy to glamorize these eras and try and imagine what they were like, but we really need to reflect on the reality of these situations. And this is something I definitely hope to cover more in my podcast and YouTube channel as well. When it comes to pinup in modern times in the sense of fashion has always been very cyclical, so we do see many elements from these vintage eras that pop up very regularly in our modern times. When it comes to pinup as we know it today, I would say a really big connecting point to this is Dita Von Teese, who's an absolute icon. If you haven't heard of her before, most people have. Do look her up on Instagram, she is utterly fabulous, but she has a big role in bringing back pinup and burlesque into modern times, and she's someone that definitely introduced me to the style. When we define pinup today, it can reference many different things from lifestyle to community, fashion, vocation, to a way of life. Today you can identify as a pinup but not actually be involved in modeling in any way. It can be more about dressing in a style from a different era that you really enjoy. A question I'm asked frequently is regarding if pinup has a gender connected to it. And I'm a really big believer of vintage fashion, not vintage values, and this is all about loving the vintage style but not believing in those vintage ideologies. While it's often presented in a feminine fashion, there are many different degrees of vintage fashion, from dapper to teddy to many other stylings in between. Pinup definitely has no gender in our modern times. Where I live, I run a community group called the Perth Pinup Community, and we have a wide range of members who identify as pinup, and they come from a wide range of genders, so there's definitely no limitations there. Whilst the origins are more femme-identifying, they have definitely evolved far beyond this. Looking into pinup today and exploring and researching for this has been so much fun, so I can't wait to tackle more topics regarding this in the future. I truly hope you've enjoyed today's episode. If you have and you're on YouTube, be sure to give me a like and a comment, as that really helps me out. And if you're on Spotify, please do think about giving me a 5-star review, as that'll really help boost me up so other people can find me. If you'd like early access to my content, I do have my Glamour community on Patreon. I'd like to thank all my patrons, but especially my VIP Glamour patrons and Burlesque Glamour students. The support you give me truly helps me in creating more here on YouTube and Spotify. To follow my daily pinup and burlesque adventures, I post super regularly to Instagram and TikTok. Simply follow at Miss Lady Lace and be sure to send me a message so I can follow you back too. To never miss out on one of my uploads, be sure to subscribe to my Pinup Glamour channel and Pinup Glamour podcast, and I will be seeing you all next week. Stay glamorous!